varsityedge.com.
All right, coaches, welcome to the Varsity Edge. This is Coach Coltharp, and tonight I'm really excited about our clinic. We're going to be talking new coaches survival guide, and this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart as I've begun this road to the Varsity Edge, moving away from Air Raid Nation and all that other good stuff. In the comments down low, just kind of let me know when's the first time you ever saw me. Most of you guys will probably be seeing this on the replay, which is cool. Um, but just when was the first time you ever saw me online? Was it is it today, or is it the Varsity Edge? Is it Air Raid Nation, 92 Mesh Group, all those kind of things? Got a lot going on. Wanted to share with you a couple of little things. Tonight's clinic is kind of based on a work that I created called the Hitchhiker's Guide to a New Football Season. And it's designed to be a new high school coach's survival guide. And if you're happening to catch this when it first starts, between now, today, and then Wednesday, the August the 6th, the ebook is actually free on Amazon. So you're able to go over to Amazon. You can download it free. If you have an Audible account, you can get that. You can get that as well. Um, but here it is, and basically it's me talking about what you can expect as a new coach going through a football season, and also got some personal stories in there from me, some of my times as a young coach, and even sometimes as a more veteran coach, dealing with things like having blow ups in the staff room, how you deal with those kind of things, and some of the mistakes I've made, or just kind of certain jobs that were way more important than what I thought they were when I first started. And I think that's super super important, as you move through those things. So if you want, I'll leave a link down in the description so you can take a look at you know at the book. I've got several different books, obviously, and it's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Helping coaches and things of that nature. So we're just gonna jump into it today, and run you kind of through the guide, and how I feel like things can help you. So these are 5 lessons every new football coach needs. If you're like me, we're in week 2, and we've already had some interesting some interesting things to deal with already, which has been kind of fun. I don't know how it is in some states, but like in North Carolina, you have to have a certain number of days in before you can scrimmage, and a certain number of days before you can hit, and things like that, those acclimation days. And I just I've been different places, but some kids just have other things that are going on. I talked to a buddy of mine. He's starting off at a new school, and he's talking about they were looking like $1 million, and then yesterday his tailback didn't come to practice, and so now the tailback can't come to the first scrimmage, or because he won't have enough days in. And it used to be really, really important to do it like that. But what happens is, I think North Carolina changed their schedule, and dropped into a deal. So we have a little bit longer preseason, but we still play before we actually start school. There have been some years where we've had 2 games before we started school, but I think we just have one this time. So also in the comments, like, when is your first game? How long is your preseason? We started July 29th, and so we've got 3 weeks of preseason. So that's something kind of new. So let's kind of jump into the clinic, and so tonight you're not here for theory. We're going to talk about what it's like as a young coach, and a lot of you guys are getting thrown in the water. I want to kind of teach you 3 things. How to settle the storm, how to survive the role, and then obviously survived the week. There's a lot of questions and answers about, when you first get that job, how it happens. There's that anticipation. I'm so excited. And what you find out when you get into this is, um you're like, whoa, I did not know this goes into it. One of the things that I talk about in my book, the Hitchhiker Guide, that's really kind of cool, is I was actually hired by my high school coach. If you've ever had a chance to work for the guys that coached you, or worked with guys that coached you, it's just a different thing. I'm 50 years old, and I still will not call my high school coach by his first name. And he's tried to correct me over the years, and he'll still call every now and then to check me up. um but I still call him coach. I will not call him Milton, uh to his face, or for sure. And but he's still Coach Butts to me, and he'll always be Coach Butts to me. And but when I got on that staff with those guys, and I talk about this in the book, the whole idea of, whoa, this coaching thing isn't what I thought. And these guys, these were coaches that when I was a player were not, they were infallible. They couldn't do anything wrong. I worshiped the ground that they walked on. And then when I started working with them, I realized that they were regular dudes, and they made mistakes, and they argued, and things like that. So it's an interesting dynamic that you go through. Um, but we're going to kind of talk about five keys that you have to have as a young coach getting into your first season, whether it's your first, second, or third season. um I've always been really cognizant of trying to mentor coaches, because coaches mentored me. So if you're lucky enough to have a head coach who isn't bogged down with the job, but is also about developing coaches, call yourself lucky. Obviously the first thing is, you don't want to panic. We're going to talk about why you were hired, the idea of being trustworthy, earning that trust before you try to demand it. A lot of young coaches are so excited to be coached that they want to force people to treat them as, yo, I'm coach now, you're going to treat me a certain kind of way. And there's some mistakes to be made in that area. Number four is really important, and I talk about this in my book as well. Just understanding how to teach kids where they are, and especially if you were a high level player. I was fortunate enough to play Division 1, but I was a very average college football player at the best. I was a little undersized as an offensive lineman. Effort was a thing for me, but I was still talented. Especially in high school, very, very talented. And then when I got to coaching, I talk about this again in the book, where one of the things Coach Butts told me very early in my coaching career is that you have to understand these guys can't do the things that you can do. There's a reason why you went to college. There's a reason why a small percentage of high school kids go to college. And, expecting them to be able to perform and do the things that you did at a high level is sometimes a letdown as a young coach, because you're like, why can't they just understand it? I'm a special ed teacher now. And so sometimes I'll be working with kids, and doing like simple math problems, and I have to catch myself like, yo, why does this kid not understand? Like, this is the simplest concept. But being able, then you realize coaching ain't nothing but teaching. And then you have to break it down into segments, and you learn how to do that. And then the last thing, and I actually had a conversation with my head coach about this the other day. If you've ever been a head coach, the look when your head coach gets that look on his face. It's a look of quiet frustration about a certain thing. And we were in a break period, and I just kind of walked over to him, and I looked at him, and I said, all right, man, we just got to control the controllables. And he just smiled at me. He was like, yeah. And that's one of those things that, as you become a head coach, that's probably the thing that you latch on to the most, especially if things aren't going as well as you want them to early, is find the things that you can control. Hopefully by the end of this clinic, you're able to kind of leave with a calm, practical way of looking at things. Um, you can listen to the book on audio, like I said earlier, on Audible, and it's about an hour and 45 minutes. So, I mean, you literally, like, I have like a 45-minute commute to my school, from where I live. I mean, I only live 20 miles away, but there's just no quick way to get there. So I actually listened to it the other day just to kind of see. And I, on the way to practice and on the way back home from practice, and I pretty much finished the book. So it's a good thing to do. So let's talk about the first thing. This idea of not panicking. If you're feeling overwhelmed by something, it doesn't mean that you don't belong. Okay, it just means that the job is important. All right. And I'm sure young coaches in particular, you have an idea, especially if you played for successful coaches. Successful coaches make it look easy. You're just like, man, this dude is like, how does he do this? And how does he do that? And you don't realize, like, you're like, wow, man. You get in there and you're just like, whoa, this is crazy. I got this period and that period and this period, and I got to get this done. I got to get that done. And in the book, I talk about a time where I was given an assignment in practice to put two plays in. It was like an install practice. It wasn't like a polished practice. It wasn't a game week practice. And I got so focused on one play that I forgot to put in the other play. And man, I got my butt chewed when we got the team. And man, I felt like I was 15 all over again because, but then it was this thing where I got so overwhelmed with making sure that everything was done right that I didn't get anything done. And then you're like, oh my God, I gotta get this done. I gotta get this done. And when you turn your level up and when that panic level happens, what you do is you turn small problems into emergencies. Like, yo, that's not that serious, dude. Be able to take things one at a time. It goes all the way back to control to controllable. And the thing that I would ask for you to do as a young guy is go in the coach's office, man, and just, they tell you as a young teacher to stay out of the teacher's lounge. And that's really good advice. Because back in the day, that's where everybody went and griped and complained. You walk in the teacher's lounge and everybody's complaining about this, complaining about that, and they tell you to kind of stay away. The coach's office is the complete opposite. Go in there and find a corner, sit down, and just listen to what coaches are talking about, listen to how they're handling certain situations. And a lot of times you can find out how to handle a situation, but on other times you can find out how not to handle situations. But write everything down. It's just like, listen, ask better questions. Like, coach, we got to do this, but how can I get to this and this done? And one of the old vets might look at you, well, look, man, it's a transition thing. If you'll set that drill up before you get out there, go over there and get your pads ready. That's one of the things I do. Like during offensive time, I'll go to the shed and get the stuff out that I need from my individual drill, so that when we go to defense, because I'm coaching defense right now, whenever we get the linebacker drills, everything I need is right there. Well, if you don't have everything set up, you don't take that pre-practice time to do those things. Now you've lost 3 or 4 minutes a period, and you're losing those times. So listen to these little things, listen to these little coaching keys, pay attention to guys who are really really successful, and also pay attention to guys who are like less successful, because you'll figure out what not to do is almost important as what fixing out what to do. Hey, look, man, don't start questioning why you're in the room. Okay, now there's a caveat to this. Some of us were hired because there wasn't nobody else. You're in the building and you know a little bit about football. You might have been a JV wide receiver or whatever. And they're like, all right, we got a football coach opening. We want you to coach football, you know? And they're like, all right, now you're on staff. And that might be why you're hired. But that doesn't mean you don't have to be, you can't be a great football coach. All right. Two of the greatest football coaches in the history of college football didn't play college football. Mike Leach and Lou Holtz. Rest both of their souls. But neither one of those guys played college football. Two of the greatest football coaches ever. Both of them are college football Hall of Famers. And but just know that somebody thought enough of you to put you on staff. Um, and so now you just got to say, okay, and I'm on staff. I'm not going to let anybody question why I'm on staff, but I'm going to show people why I deserve to be here. And that means going out there every day and putting in that work, and When people see you putting in that work, they're all of a sudden they're like, yo, man, that young kid, man, there's something about him. He's asking questions, he's paying attention, he wants to be better. He's just not here. He's not excited. And to me, that's the difference between like a lot of youth coaches and middle school coaches and things like that. Sometimes some of the middle school guys, they just got thrown into it and they're just excited. They want people to call them coach and they don't really want to do the work. They want to coach football during football season. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's your role. But then there's other guys, they're just so excited to be called coach that they go on this power trip. All right. What are you doing? What's your plan? And I talk about this in the book too. The first question my head coach asked me when he gave me a job was, when am I going to go get my master's? Now, he asked me that because I was one of his kids and he was talking about my personal development. And then the second question he asked me was, did I want to be a head coach? Because that changes everything. If you want to be a head coach, you need to understand what it means to be a head coach. And that's that thing. And so I would ask you to do this. Can you define your role on the staff in one sentence? Okay? What is your job? My job is to teach the fundamentals to the wide receivers every day and try to get maximum effort out of their performance. Okay, well, if that's your gig, then you need to try to accomplish that every day. Don't get overwhelmed with everything else because Coach Butts used to have this thing on the coaching assignment sheet. It was a little asterisk, and it was all of the things assigned by the head coach. Right? Don't get overwhelmed by that because your number one gig is to coach wideouts, or your number one gig is to coach offensive line. And young guys today they get really tied up in this idea of what titles they have and all this other thing. But I'm really all about this bloom where you're planted thing. Look, your time to be offensive coordinator will come. Your time will be head coach will come. And I talk about that in the book too, where, look, man, I would be sitting out there and I played in like a one back offense. I played in a Nebraska G load offense and all this other stuff in college. And then I come back and we're running an old 21 personnel, off tackle, throw to fade, tight end dump offense. And I'm in there trying in the room talking about, hey, we should do this, we should do that. And my head coach looked at me and he said, hey, man, when you get your team, you can run whatever you want. But right now, we're going to run this. Your job is to make sure that we can run this. And so, as a young guy, don't let yourself be overwhelmed with the big picture. Okay. Focus on the little things because little things make big things. And one of the things that I learned when I started working with Coach Salas, and it was my third head coaching job at that point, but we really focused on this idea of details making champions. Focus on that little thing, man. And it's so easy in coaching your position. Like let's stick with coaching wide receivers, that just the little thing of having your thumbs together and your hands up when you're in your stance. If that's what you coach, are you in reinforcing that for every rep? Because every time you let a little thing slide, the less important it becomes. And if it's not important to you, how is it going to be important to your players? Okay. Your expectations matter. And as a young coach, what happens is, and we got a couple of young guys on our staff now, the kids look at them differently than they look at me. Then they look at our offensive line coach who's got 30 some years and we're the old heads. Okay. They look at those young coaches differently. And literally what it ain't more than just what our expectations are. Okay. The young guys are still in this mode of I'm a coach now. One of our guys was a former player. We've got guys on our team. Well, I think last year was where our seniors had played with him. Now we don't have that anymore, but they look at him differently. And so it's like you have to be up there and say, okay, I'm the young dude, but I know what I'm doing, and these are the expectations. And as a young coach, you have to set expectations and reinforce expectations. You can still be the cool young guy, but understand they have to look at you as a coach. And this is where we talk about demanding that respect. But that's how you earn it. You earn it by demonstrating your knowledge, reinforcing your expectations, and doing that every day. And that's a simple thing. And if you're a teacher, Same way. It's Harry Wong 101. You set structure, you set routine, and you stay with those routines. And I talked to my defensive staff about this at the beginning of camp. I want individual period to be able to be run by itself. If none of the coaches were there, the kids should know what all the drills are every day. And so they know we're going here, 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 and we're going to do those things every day. And that's such an air raid thing that's so important. And by doing those things, um, there's that old thing about, kids don't care until they know how much you care and all that stuff. But as a coach, um, they really don't care about how much football you know. They want to know that are you going to be consistently there, you're going to be present there every day, and you're going to be prepared every day. And that's your responsibility as a coach. That's the difference. Players just show up. They just show up to practice, and the schedule's on the wall. Okay, we're going to do this. But you as a coach, you have to be prepared. You can't look at the play chart that day and say, okay, how do I run this? Like we have a staff meeting every day after practice. Like we met after practice today. We talked about practice for tomorrow morning. So our coaches know what's going in. We got a new coverage. We do a 3 under 3 deep roll to our fire zones. Well, tomorrow we're putting in our inside cross blitzes and things. And so we have a coverage. We changed the name of the coverage so that the safeties would know to insert in the middle instead of to the outside. So we talked about that at practice yesterday, after the meeting today for practice tomorrow. And so that my coaches and my D line coaches, linebacker coach, secondary coaches, they all have to be ready for that when we get there. And so when you show up to practice and even if you're faking it till you make it, but it sounds like you know what you're doing and you're consistently upholding those standards, then what you find is like, whoa, these kids are going to start looking at you differently. Your credibility as a coach are built. This is a great line. Credibility is built in ordinary moments. All right. Friday night takes care of itself, man. If you're trying to define yourself on Friday night, it's way too late. But if you want your kids to respect you, if you want your kids to think that you're not just that dude on staff, that young guy where they didn't, that they didn't have anybody else guy. um, you have to build those that clarity with those consistent expectations. And here's the deal, man. Be early, you know be consistent, be steady. When you make a correction, correct it with clarity. And then when guys do a good job, don't just say good job, say, hey man, great hat placement. Hey, great get off, good hands. you know be very specific, because then that makes the kids like, all right, man, coach is really watching. I was coaching centers today. Um, because we kind of have an offensive defensive position, but I help with the running backs and quarterbacks, and we had the center over there with us, and we were doing kind of barrels, handoffs and things like that, and he was snapping, working on his gun snaps. Obviously I played center in college, so he started working on things, and so I started working with him. We started talking about the hand being a lever, and when the hand moves, the foot moves, and short steps versus long steps. And so once he finally got it right, I said, "Did you feel that?" I said, "Did you feel that little punch step right there?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, coach, that makes a big difference." And then we got in the team, and I didn't say a word to him. I was coaching defense, but I watched him, and I saw that little punch step coming, and I was like, "Yeah." So tomorrow when I see him, I'm be like, "Hey, bud, I saw that yesterday in team. That looked pretty good. How'd that feel?" Okay, that builds that credibility, and you don't have to be a 27, 28-year-old vet like me to have that. Okay, so as a young coach, focus on those little things, be consistent, be prepared. Don't pull up at the last minute. All right, and a lot of us, when we were young coaches, we were just trying to figure out how to be grown. We're still staying up 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning playing the game. We're just fresh out of college, or some of us were in college still trying to coach. My first job, I was doing my student teaching. And then it only gets tougher when you start getting families and girlfriends and things like that. But you have to earn that trust. Let them know that you can do things. Also in the book, I talk about a situation. One of the biggest lessons I ever learned. We were scrimmaging Richmond County, and if you're from North Carolina, you know who Richmond County is. But back in the late 80s, early 90s, man, they were just killing everybody. 10, 11, 12 games a year, that kind of thing. Had a bunch of guys go D1, and their head coach was a guy named Daryl Barnes. And he's legendary in North Carolina, but we were scrimmaging them, and I can remember being as a young coach, the D line coach was just losing his mind. I mean, he was just fussing and yelling and everything. And from across the way, uh, you hear Coach Barnes yelling, "Stop yelling and fix it." And that stood with me for a long time, because a lot of guys who think they're coaching, they're just yelling and screaming, or they're trying to be old school. But really, what are you saying? You could say a whole lot without saying nothing. You're saying a whole lot, but really, what are you saying? Fix it. That's that praise and correction with clarity and specificity. Yeah, that's a big word there. Um, you know, be specific in what you're teaching. And if a guy's not getting after it, that's when you light the tempo up a little bit on him, and you get a little excited. But man, you can't be hollering at a kid if you're asking him to do something he don't know how to do, or you haven't taught correctly. You get after them when the effort is lacking. But if they don't know anything, you got to teach them, and that's another way to learn trust. I talked to a kid after practice today. We were walking off practice, and the head coach had lit into him a little bit because he had a false start, and I didn't like the kid's body language. Like, he didn't react well to the coach getting on him. I mean, it was kind of a big deal, and it was like 2 or 3 reps left in practice. He's hot and he's tired and he lost his focus. And so we're walking off practice field, and I'm like, "Yo, man, what was up with that body language response?" "Man, coach, I just got really upset with myself and all this stuff." And so then we started talking about this idea of self-talk. And this is where you get into the difference between being a high level player and an average player. And a lot of it is not ability, it's attitude and self-talk. And so I asked him, I said, he said, "Man, I was so mad at myself for doing that." And then so I asked him, I said, "Hey, man, would you talk to your best friend the way you talk to yourself?" "Nah, nah, coach." I said, "Well, what if somebody talked to your mama the way that you talk to yourself?" "Nah, nah, nah." I said, "Well, man, you are the most important person in the world to you. And if you don't treat yourself well, how do you expect everybody else to do it?" And his eyes just kind of looked at me, and he's like, "Yo, coach, I guess I didn't think of it like that." I was like, "Yeah, man." I was like, you got to improve your self-talk. I was like, because we know how good you are, you know but the difference between being a good player and a great player is your attitude, your body language, and how you talk to yourself. And so that was one of those things where I wasn't expecting him to be able to do physically what I could do, but that was one of the things that I could share with him that helped me be a better player. Was that I never really got down on myself a lot. I was 100% behind me. I was always pushing me. I didn't want nobody had to pull me along for the most part. I wanted to push me, especially when I knew kind of what was going on. So, you know, you got to realize that, especially like I said, once again, if you were a high level player, you can't coach that player you used to be. You got to coach that player standing in front of you. And that's so important. And the reality of that is the best coaches translate the game until kids can own it. It doesn't matter what you know. Okay. There's That's a chronic young guy mistake. It's a chronic cocky guy mistake. You try to coach like you're at the clinic. You know, you try to coach what you're at the clinic. Like, and I'll give you a classic example today in practice. We were talking about we were doing what we call key drill. Early in the season, we don't really run a full speed onside inside run drill. What we do is we run a play or walk through a play, and we fit every defensive player where they're supposed to fit. So today we were doing GT and GH counter, and I was trying to show everybody where they fit. And so I was talking to outside backer and the safety, because when we do key drill, we always go 9 on 7. And I said, "Okay, hey, what's your key?" Well, the outside backer and the safety, their key is the end man on line of scrimmage. All right. And that's that great clinic talk. When I go to a clinic and I'm teaching my defense, I'm like, "All right, man, we got I key. Our first I key is end man line of scrimmage, and then we got a flow key, also stuff." But literally, I looked at the kid and I was like, "All right, man, who you looking at?" He was like, "Well, that dude." I was like, "Yes." And for practice for that kid, all he needed to know it was that dude on the end. He didn't need to be able to say end man on line of scrimmage. This guy number. Hey, I got to look at that dude. And so that was me putting it in language that they could understand, that it wasn't important that they talked like a coach. It was important that they understood what I was requiring them. So you being able to reduce that language, slow things down for them, and simplify it is what makes you a better coach. And as a young coach, sometimes you feel like you have to overcoach because not only are you trying to teach your players, but you're trying to gain respect. Okay. The number one way to gain respect as a young coach is to get results. Okay. The reason why a young coach, I saw something on Facebook the other day. It was this thing about tag all the coaches that made a difference in your life, and it was for coaches. So like, and so one of the guys that I coached years and years and years ago, he tagged a bunch of guys, and I was in there, and he talked about people, and it was funny because I coached him when I was 23, 24 years old. And one of the things he said was, Coach C, he was always the players coach, and but I'm still learning from him today, and things like that. And what I took that to mean was is I knew how to talk to them where they are. And even as a 50-year-old, one of the things that I pride myself into is being able to talk to the players where they are. Being able to be okay with them saying, "Yo, that dude, coach. All right, brother. As long as you know what we're talking about. All right. So when that dude hi hats, what do you do? Oh, when he hi hats, I'm gonna step here, then I'm gonna do this. All right, bet. So he understands. Okay. He doesn't have to talk like he's going to talk in front of a bunch of different coaches at a clinic and things like that. Speaking of clinics, we're probably gonna have a clinic here in Pinehurst in the spring. Trying to work out some golf stuff like that. So if that's something you're interested in, maybe drop it in the comment. Hey coach, I'll be thinking about doing that. If you've ever been to Pinehurst, man, we got so many daggone golf courses up here. It's crazy, but it's a cool place. It's got a bunch of little cool places to do. But I'm thinking about doing a Varsity Edge clinic here in the spring. So if that's something you'd be interested in, drop that in the comment, and we'll start planning that for the spring because that it'll be the spring before we know it. All right, and then kind of that last part is controlling the controllables. You can't control who gets hurt. You can't control, the weather. You can't control officials. You can't control the parents. You can't control the way the ball bounces on Friday. All you can do is control preparation and control response. I always go back to the Navy SEALs deal. And if you're a young coach and you don't read, um, that's a thing. Okay, I wish I would have read more. And I'm a reader, but like just different books. Like Coach Prime's book that just came out a couple years ago was really cool. Dion talked about one of the things that Dion talks about in his book is he's never had a bad day. And of course, like, oh, that's some B. Everybody's had bad days. Well, the way Dion looks at it is I've had bad moments. He's like, I've had bad moments, but I've never had bad days because the only way bad days happen is you stack up bad moments. And I actually used that today when I was talking with that kid about his body language. I was like, well, look, man, if you beat yourself up about this play, what happens on the next play? Well, man, I'm probably going to mess that up because I'm still mad. Yeah. So now you got two plays bad. So now you've had a bad series. Next thing you know, you've had a bad quarter. Then you've had a bad half. And then you had a bad game. And then you spent the whole weekend pissed off that you had a bad game. And then that slides in the next week's practice. And then there you go. And then, in baseball, they call that a slump. You get into this slump. And look, those guys are high level. Like, and I was talking to a kid about this the other day. We have a pretty large Hispanic population. And I ain't gonna act like that's the only reason. I love soccer. Okay. I played as a little kid because I lived in Germany and I couldn't play football. I didn't get to play American football until I was in middle school. So I loved soccer, growing up. But I was talking to one of those kids. I was like, hey man, think about this. Like quality class, there's a saying in soccer, is classes last forever. Okay, them dudes that are talented, like Jordan can go out there right now on the basketball court and shoot a three, and it's probably gonna go in. David Beckham can kick a ball from 40 yards away and hit a trash can. Problem is he can't run up and down the field and do that anymore. He can't do all that stuff. Okay. And so, that's kind of that thing where, all right, Those guys are going to be good no matter what. And those are the things that you can control. So it's a thing, your peace comes from the process. Just know that every day you're doing the things that you're supposed to do. You're prepared for practice. You're consistent in your instruction. You're present every day, and you're talking to kids about controlling the things that they can control. Because that's an even important concept for players as much as it is for coaches. But as a coach, and coaching is teaching. So those you guys who are going into classroom, think about it like this: have a weekly rhythm. This is my plan. I'm a plan. I'm gonna teach it. I'm gonna review how it went. If it didn't go well, I'm gonna make an adjustment, and then I'm gonna recover, and I'm gonna do it all over again. That literally is. And the best teachers and I had a principal tell me this one time. He said, man, I really want you coaches to do a staff development for our teachers. And I looked at him like he was crazy. I mean, I've got basically a doctorate degree in curriculum instruction. I was doing my dissertation when COVID hit, and I just never went back and finished it. So I'm what you call ABD. So I mean, technically, I got my doctorate in curriculum. So I mean, I know all that, the book jargon and all sort of stuff. But I also know that if the football coach got up into a room and tried to teach the English teacher or the math teacher how to be a teacher, he would never get no help with a kid that was struggling ever again. So the reality of doing that, I'm like, yo, boss, that ain't happening. He's like, well, it's a good idea, but I feel you. I understand what you're saying. And he was a great principal. Um, but his point was well taken, because what do great coaches do? They plan, they teach, they review, they adjust, and then they recover. What do you do on Friday night? You put a game plan in. During the week, you teach that plan. On Thursday, you review that plan. On Friday, you implement that plan. And then you make adjustments on the fly, whether it's an audible, whether it's a sideline adjustment, whether it's a halftime adjustment. All right. And then you try to recover based on what you see. That's straight up coaching. That's survival mode. And the quicker you as a young coach get into this process, the better you're gonna be. All right, so let's talk about, kind of getting into this deal. All right. This is kind of your first month operating system. All right. You don't try to become that dude in August. You're not gonna be the coach. You're not gonna be the coach that you're gonna be in November, in August. All right. But if you will get into this kind of weekly process, it'll help you make it through. All right. So the first day, Monday, prepare. And that happens on Sunday, young guys. Saturdays and Sundays, understand it's a 7-day gig. Watch the film, figure out who's doing what. And let's go ahead and dispel this rumor. Hours of film don't make you a great coach. Staring at film doesn't make a great coach. When I was a head coach, when we first got started getting the huddle, the best thing they ever did in huddle, people thought, is you could see how much time your players watched film. And then people were like, well, why don't they display how long the coaches watch film? Well, what you don't know is the head coach can see that. He can go into the report and see how much time you spent watching film. Okay. And I had a really good coach on my staff, but he didn't watch hours of film. He watched probably hour and a half a week. And there was other guys that were watching 10 hours a week, you know. And I asked him about it one time. I said, Coach, man, what's this about? He said, look here, man. He said, I watched the film one time through. I see who their dudes are. I get a basic idea of what they got going on. And I figure out, and then I use kind of the Joe Montana, Bill Walsh idea. And this changed me as a head coach, because I used to be one of those guys that had 20 plays in the folder trying to get ready for this and all that other stuff. But then you realize, why do I have all of that done? Because they asked Joe Montana one time, they said, hey, when you get down in the red zone, and for you young guys, Joe Montana was Tom Brady before Tom Brady was Tom Brady. He won like 4 Super Bowls with the San Francisco 49ers. I keep forgetting I'm that old now that I have to to throw that back out there. But they asked him, they said, Bill Walsh, and Bill Walsh, legendary NFL coach, when he got down in the red zone, what was his play calling, idea? And he said, man, he called base offense. He said, huh? Yeah, he said, man, we don't run trick plays in the red zone. He said, we're going down there, we call them base offense because that's what we have the most reps at. That's what we're the best at. And I thought to myself, okay, that's great. So I'm gonna pick your three best runs and probably your three or four best passes, and that's all we're gonna practice all week. Your one or two kick, your one quick game that you run a lot, your two deep passes, your play action, maybe a screen, and then two runs, and that's all we're gonna work on all week. The rest of the time, I'm just gonna teach my kids how to line up, and how to fit, and then understand what we're gonna do. And that make but so he's like, I can do all of that, coach, in an hour 45 minutes, 2 hours. By the time I've watched 2 hours of film, I already know what's going on. And I'm like, that makes perfect sense. And then now with all this data, you got all the data, they'll huddle or run the reports, and now AI will do all this stuff for you. And the one thing that I would caution, and I'm gonna sound like an old head here, be careful with the AI stuff. And look, I got stuff on the website. I got some things to help you break down film using AI, and I've done some videos on AI. So don't get me wrong, I'm not anti AI. All right. I've got some computer programs that I've put out and that I'm putting out here, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes that are going to help you as a coach that I've used the AI to help code and write. All right. But the problem with AI for football coaches is this: if AI is doing the grind, do you get the reps? All right. Are you getting the reps? Because on Friday night, you can't use AI to make calls. Okay. So there's a thing where, they used to say, if I see it, I'll remember a little bit. If I say it, I'll remember a little bit more. So if I see it and I say it, I remember. If I see it, say it, and write it, I'll remember a little bit more. Okay. So if I see it, say it, write it, and then repeat it, then I'm on my way to mastery. Okay, well, if you're throwing stuff into AI, and there's all kind of stuff now where, hey, AI will break down the film for you, AI do. Okay, but if their AI is doing all of that work for you, how much of that are you going to retain? Because I can tell you this, this is I was looking at this other day. This is my little defensive call sheet from a couple years ago. I mean, that's how little it is. I can't put on here, okay, on third down, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. Because, you're going against somebody with tempo. You ain't got time to do all this. So you have to have some of that stuff in your locker. So when I say be careful with AI, is understand AI can make your job easier, but it still can't do your job. Okay. So if you got some assumptions and you type in your assumptions in and you throw it in AI, and let AI validate you, that's fine. Or if AI gives you a starting point and then you build off of that, just always remember, see it, say it, write it, repeat it. See it, say it, write it, repeat it. And then on Friday night, when the bullets are flying, you'll still remember, yo, on third and long, they like to do this. Well, AI told you that maybe, but if you see it, say it, write it, repeat it, now you're going to remember it. And then when it counts, it's going to make a difference. But if you're just looking at some report and AI did all the work and you didn't do the background to back it up, that's a little bit of a thing. So, you're going to prepare on Monday. Tuesday, I'm gonna teach. I'm gonna make things as simple, even into I'm keying that dude, coach. And then Wednesday, I'm gonna start correcting things. Thursday, I'm gonna clarify. I'm gonna go back, remove doubt, and then Friday, I'm gonna respond. So that's kind of your weekly loop as a young coach, and even as a veteran coach. Prepare, teach, correct, clarify, respond. All right. If you can find yourself in that loop, all right, in that loop and it that don't even have to be a weekly loop. I mean, that could be your position group loop. But that comes back to that consistency, that being persistent with your expectations, that what are you allowed to let slip? And as a young coach, you build credibility quickly when they see that you pay attention to details. Young coaches are chronic about not they're such big picture guys, they're macro guys that they don't realize to get to be the macro guy, you got to be a really good micro guy. Okay. And I can tell you my first head coaching job when I was 26, I had no clue um the macro of the football program, but I had been trained in all the micros. And I talked about that. I talk about that in my book too. Coach Butts did a really good job of training me in the micros. There's a section in the book where I talk about he throws me into an equipment room that had equipment in there since 1988 or whatever it was. He's like, "All right, rookie." And if you ever saw Coach Butts, he's 6'5". He's about 300-pound black dude. He played for the New Orleans Saints in the 70s. A very intimidating presence. But he's all right, rookie. Go ahead. I'll see you in a couple of days. And I mean, he just turned me loose in the equipment room, and that was the first micro. Then it was dealing with physicals and paperwork. That was another micro. Ordering equipment and dealing with those things. That was a micro. Coaching offense. So I learned all these micros, but had no idea about the macros. That's a much better way of going to it than worried about the macro and they realizing you don't understand the micros. So as a young coach, focus on those micros, and you'll get such a better response. So what you got to stop doing as a new coach. Don't try to be the smartest dude in the room. It's okay to say key that dude. All right. Young coaches want to sound smart, they want to sound important, but it's okay to say key that dude. If you're trying to fix everything, you ain't fixing nothing. All right. I will tell you, and I said this today at practice. I don't care what scheme you run, whether you're a double wing team, an air raid team, spread gun, go, all them playbooks that you see on Madden and college football. I don't care what any of those playbooks say. Football will always be about the teams that block and tackle the best. Okay. So if you're trying to fix everything, you can't fix it. But everything starts with a good stance. Don't try to fix a route if the stance ain't right. All right. So if a kid's stance in his, when his get off is terrible, it's his stance. Start with his stance. The little things matter. It's a little joke I use with the kids all the time. I don't even have to say it. They just all giggle when I say it. Like, hey man, little things make big things. For most of us anyway. And then they all giggle. But what sticks to them is that the little things make big things. Okay. So trying to correct everything, you're not gonna correct everything. Uh don't take things personal. When kids don't play well, it's not your fault. They're not saying F coach, I'm gonna do it wrong because I don't like ain't nobody failed because they didn't like somebody. All right. If somebody's willing to fail just because they don't like you, I mean, come on, dude. That makes no good sense. So you can't take those failures personally. Because I'm gonna tell you what's gonna happen. It happens in life. You pour into certain kids or pour into family members, and heck, it might even be you. I know I've let my family down plenty of times over my lifetime. All right. But I didn't set out to do it. It just happened. Then it becomes, a recovery type thing. How do I fix that? How do I come back from that? But you can't take every failure personal. All right. You just got to take that as a challenge to jump back in there, figure it out. And we talk about that process, right? Okay, you want to adjust and then recover. And I tell teachers this all the time. I was an assistant principal for a while. And even now as a coach, when I talk to teachers, they get so mad. And as an EC teacher, my kids typically don't do well in class all the time. So I'll go talk to the teacher and they'll get all fired up. And I'll be like, Miss So and so, why are you so mad about this kid's grade? Well, I mean, he's failing my class. Well, sweetheart, I get what you're saying, but the actuality is this is his class. All right, you're just teaching the math class, but the grade is his. All right, you don't have to own his bad grade. Okay, he has to want that grade. And then conversely, when I talk to the kid, I'm like, look, man, she just up there teaching math. She done got her grade. If you don't care about your grade, how do you expect her to care about it? So, it's the same conversation just coming from two different directions. But when you get the teacher to understand, hey, look, man, this kid just ain't got it. He can't, a C or a D for him is the best he can do. And if he's grinding and get it, don't get upset. Don't take it personal. He ain't failing this class as to you. He's failing it because he can't get it done. And then a lot of times, well, he just don't want to do anything. Well, he don't want to do anything because he's frustrated. Because no matter how hard he tries, he's gonna fail. All right. And so some people would rather just not do than fail. I saw something, and I can't believe I'm even going to say this because it's dumbfounding to me. But I saw an interview with Jake Paul the other day, and Jake Paul is kind of a sideshow kind of guy. He boxing this, that, and the third, all sorts of stuff. You know, but he talked about he's got a company, and then the logo of his company is a W, and it's like W's, and then but in that logo there's a bunch of little L's built in the logo. And he said they said, well, yeah, you got L's, but he said, yeah, because I take every L and turn it into a W. This guy pushes himself, but he realizes that. And then he says this, he said most people who aren't successful because they're afraid to fail. And I mean, that was pretty profound. And when you look at Jake Paul, I mean, this guy's a multimillionaire, and he's a grinder, and obviously he has his public persona. But you got to realize, man, it takes a whole lot to put yourself out there. I mean, he says some crazy things like, "I bet $1 million that I could catch a touchdown before somebody could beat me in boxing." And I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. He knows how to get his clicks up. But really, what he's saying is like, I'm all right if I fail, because that's just another opportunity for me to succeed. And so he don't take that kind of stuff personally. And you just got to figure out who you are, man. You can't be me. All right. Just like I can't be you. All right, you can't change your personality to try to impress players. You got to just show them who you are authentically. Because what I found about kids see through that stuff real quick. They know if you're real and they know if you're not. And if you're acting like something you aren't, they'll see through it in a heartbeat. All right. And so kind of the things that you want to do, just ask better questions, teach one thing at a time, write down, voice note, whatever you young guys do. Um, and then work on building your trust through consistency. I promise you, if you start going to practice and you have a consistent expectation of how things are supposed to be done, and you consistently do that, hey man, let's get in that stance we talked about the other day. And don't let it slide. Don't let it slide. That's the difference between great coaches and average coaches, man. Great coaches pay attention to details because details make champions, because little things make big things for most of us. All right. And this is one of those things where you ain't got to worry about God gave you. Some of us, them, they only get so big. But in this kind of situation here, if you make those little things super, super important, the big things are going to take care of themselves. And that's that trust through consistency type of thing. And as a young coach, the quicker you buy into not letting little things get by, the better you're going to be, the quicker the kids are going to respond to you, and the more responsibility you're going to earn. Um, hey, if you can answer these 8 items, okay, you're not just surviving a season. You're developing into a coach. Hey, look, I know what my role is. All right. The group that I coach, they know what my expectations are. I have a simple language. All right. I develop little bitty things that they know. Okay. I know what we're doing at practice before the players get there. Okay. Because I get there early enough that I'm looking at the schedule, or when the head coach emails the schedule. And if the head coach don't email the schedule, ask him, hey coach, man, when you get that schedule done, can you go ahead and email it me so I can print it out and look at it in the classroom, during my planning period or whatever. All right. Um, I go into every practice with a goal. Okay, what's my goal today? Is it better hand placement, better half placement? Is it stemming my route correctly? Am I going to tackle better today? Whatever that thing is. I have one correction priority for the day. Um, if you haven't read Myron Rolle's book, The 2% Rule, that's a great book. And he talks about, I'm gonna get 2% better every day. And that comes from Mickey Andrews, a legendary defensive coordinator, worked at Florida State. Myron was a Rhodes Scholar, got drafted into the NFL, and left football to go be a brain surgeon. Like, I mean, he was an all-American football player, got drafted, and he's a brain surgeon. So, I mean, you talk about God giving you all the ability, but his family was from like Haiti or something like that. So, he didn't grow up in a situation where, he was spoiled. I mean, he had to work for everything he had, and he had a whole bunch of excuses why he could fail. But only one is excuse to succeed, and that's he decided he was going to get 2% better every day. And so, what is your 2% rule? What is your 2% rule? Um, I know the guys that need a pick me up. I can explain what I got to fix tomorrow based on today. When I walked off the practice field today, I knew what I needed to work on tomorrow based on what I saw today. Um, I've asked the veteran coaches on staff a question. Hey, coach, man, how do you handle this? Like Johnny's body language is terrible. Like he gets on himself so hard. I said, well, have you had the self talk conversation with him? What do you mean? Well, then you explain to him what I talked about self call talk, and then that's a way to help a young coach. Um, and then as I do something successful, am I documenting that? Am I writing it down, or am I just keeping that in my back pocket somewhere where I'm saying, okay, at the end of the season, when I go back, I look at this thing and I say, yo, this is a thing, this is a thing. And I can tell you right now, guys, I wish that I had had this conversation with somebody when I was 23, 24 years old. I would have been such a better coach. And this is the reason why I do the Varsity Edge, just to pass along um, some of these things that I've learned over the years. You guys as young guys, and I talk about this in the book too, the ability to just attack information, whether it be on the internet, podcasts, whatever. My buddy Jamie Bolton does Coach Speak podcast. So if you're a Twitter guy and you follow him, it's funny. Coach Salas has a big YouTube channel. He was on my staff. Coach Bolton is doing the Coach Speak, and he's way bigger than I've ever been. But he was a wide receiver coach on my staff at Red Springs. So all these guys, and it's kind of funny. I don't take credit for what they're doing, but I have a little bit into everybody as far as pushing them to be better and to do those kind of things. But if you're in the car and you're not listening to books or podcasts or things like that, I mean, it's a good way to pass some time and a good way to encourage yourself. Now, I also would encourage you to do this as a young coach, and I talk about this in the book too. There's a whole chapter talk about balance. It's okay to get away from the game too. All right. It's okay to have date night. Matter of fact, I would encourage it. I'm very honest in this book. I went through a divorce. There were times where I wasn't the best husband and things like that. I got so caught up in football and the ego of being a head football coach and those kind of things that you forget those kind of things. So finding balance as a young coach. One of the things that I'm going to do this year is, every Friday morning, Tracy and I are going to have coffee on the back porch before I go to work. That's one of those things. I mean, we try to do that anyway, but I want to spend time with her because I know it'll be 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning before I get home. And my goal for that, you know, my goal for that is to make Friday morning to be about her. Just, hey, sweetheart, I really appreciate you, because she's never been a coach's wife before. We've only been married 7, 8 months. I mean, she was with me last year during the season. But her having to adjust to having a partner who's gone the whole time is a thing. So as a young guy, don't neglect those your lady friends or your partners or whoever it is, man. Find time for them, find time for your family. It's okay to do those things, and finding that balance to be able to be successful, because consistency is such a great word in life. So answer those 8 questions. You're developing and you're not just surviving. um so like I said, man, this clinic is kind of a live in-room version of the book. The name of it's the Hitchhiker's Guide. It's kind of funny. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is kind of it's an old school book if you've never read it. So, but this is a Hitchhiker's Guide, and it's kind of written like that too. So like it's every chapter starts off with a noun or a verb, and it might say coach's office, and it gives you a definition, and then we talk about why that's important. And then I give you a coaching story to kind of go around from it, from my career, and then I kind of give you road signs to kind of give you directions on how to handle those things. But basically, every coach, um, begins somewhere. The goal is not perfection. The goal is progress with purpose. If this helps you tonight, man, just like I said, just check out the book. You can get the ebook for free between now and the 6th. Pick that up. And then, what is the one thing about this season that has you the most nervous? And that's the biggest thing. Think about that. I'll hang around in the chat for a few minutes. I appreciate you guys coming out. If you got some ideas about what you want next month's live clinic to be, or you want me to do a video or some things like that, put that in the comments too. I'll come back and check these comments pretty regularly. So if you're not here live and you caught this on the back end, that's cool. But the most important thing, guys, as a young coach, man, just keep showing up. You got hired for a reason. The difference between a coach who makes it and the one who burns out is rarely knowledge. It's the humility, consistency, and willingness to keep learning. And the fact that you're watching this clinic right now or you're here live says a lot about you. Because coaching is one of the most demanding professions there is. I've coached at the college level, I've coached at the high school level, and all those kind of things. And it can dominate and control your life, and it's one of those things that we all love. And but you find that balance, find that consistency as a young coach, because I'm gonna tell you what's gonna happen. I'll tell you one last story, and then I'll let you guys. I'll get out of here. But I can remember being a young coach. This was 1999, 2000, probably before some of you younger guys were born. I was sitting on the back steps at E. E. Smith High School, and if you're familiar with North Carolina, E. E. Smith is one of the two or three predominantly black or historically black high schools that are still open. And there were some legendary coaches that coached there. One of them was a guy named Ike Walker. He was a legendary basketball coach, and another guy was D.T. Carter, who the stadium was named after. These are, if you ever seen like Remember the Titans, these are the kind of that Herman Boone level guy. And matter of fact, I worked with a guy for a few years, Gene Arrington, who was a basketball coach, but he was actually on that Remember the Titan team. But back to the E. E. Smith discussion, where that happened. Where I can remember sitting on the back. They had these concrete slab benches, and it was one of the very first work days. And Ike Walker had come up, and it was me and Coach Butts and Roy McNeil, who was a high, Roy coached me in high school too, but he was a State Hall of Fame basketball coach, Fayetteville State Hall of Fame basketball coach. And they were all sitting there one day, and they were talking about, yeah, well, I can go home in 2001, and I can go home in 2003. And, Coach Walker had already been retired. And I can remember sitting there, and I said, well, you know what? February 1st, 2028, somebody needs a sub. And they all started laughing. And I'll never forget Roy McNeil, and he's still alive too, which just makes this even fun. Roy said, and he had this, he talked a little bit like this. Roy said, shit, I'll be dead. and and I thought to myself, man, that's so far away. Well, here we are. It's the 26-27 season. I've got one season left, before I can retire in North Carolina. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, man, that just like yesterday. And so it comes faster than you think, coaches. Enjoy the ride, do the things that you can be. Um, if there's anything I can help you with, just reach out. You can follow me on Twitter at Coach Coltharp. I'm on Instagram at Coach Coltharp. All those socials. I've got some all kind of stuff. You can go by the website, varsityedge.com. There's all kind of stuff. Got some really cool things coming up. Cleared is our new grade accountability program that's going to help you track your kids' grades without using the school system. So you kind of key it in. There's a demo of that on the website. Check that out. Earned is our new reward system where you throw your stats in, and it creates a productivity system. So if you're a sticker guy, it keeps track of how many stickers you give out and things like that. And then my newest one that I'm working on, I'm really proud of this one, is called Prepared. And Prepared is our practice system where you're going to be able to create practice schedules, store them, upload your practice cards, put your stats in, and then create off-season reports, link your videos and things like that. And it's going to be all cool, and it's all on your desktop. So like if you lose huddle or anything like that, you don't lose. you don't lose access to your things like that. So just kind of what I'm trying to do is think about things that I would have loved to had as a player or as a young coach. I'm trying to develop those kind of systems. That's the purpose of Varsity Edge is, I'm just trying to do things and pass along, knowledge that I've learned to kind of help you guys as young coaches develop and grow this game that we love. And all that being said, if you don't anybody, I'll wait around for a couple more minutes. If anybody has any questions that's still in the room, just go ahead and type them in the box. Other than that, I'm gonna get out of here. And I wish you guys all the best on Friday night.